What's up, friends? Welcome to Drop Into Dr. Awesome. I am Dr. Awesome, and we're going to talk a little bit about correcting under and overexposure in Adobe Premiere Pro. So, like pretty much everything when it comes to shooting video, the best choice is to get this right in camera and not have to fix it in post, but it happens to the best of us. There will be times where shots are underexposed, so there's not enough light. There'll be times where shots are overexposed, which means there's too much light. And sometimes you can't reshoot. Sometimes you've just got to take that footage and make it work. Now, of course, there are times where garbage is garbage and you can't save it, but for the most part, you can usually take footage and bring it back to maybe not the best, but a usable level. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with underexposed and sort of bring it up to being usable, and then we'll start with overexposed and bring it back down to usable. All right, let's go ahead and jump into Premiere and we'll do this. All right, so like I said, we are going to start with underexposed, and we're going to be working in the color workspace within Premiere. Now over here on the left-hand side, you'll see your Lumetri scopes. If you don't see those, you can always click on this little tab to see what's going on, and you can always change what scopes are happening over here in this left-hand side. But for what we're doing right now, we're only going to worry about the waveform. And so what I would do is I would click on this little wrench right here and get rid of all of the rest of these if they're open. Make sure your waveform is checked, and then make sure that you come down here to waveform type and make sure that it's set to Luma. We're not going to focus on this a whole lot, but it is sort of helpful as a visual aid to understand what we're actually doing. When we're talking about this waveform scope, 0 represents black and 100 represents white. Anything below or at that 0 is going to be what we refer to as crushed black. Anything above that white, that 100 is going to be sort of overexposed beyond repair. There's not going to be any data the camera can record above that 100. Looking at our underexposed shot here, you can see that we've got a lot of black stuff down here. This is actually going to be the desk and the shadow. Actually, this line represents the desk, and then this very bottom is going to be these shadows on the desk. Those are just so dark that the camera can't, the computer can't see really past them. And this is sort of, this shape here is sort of my body form. This right here, this peak is going to be this bright spot on my head right here, or possibly on my hands. Again, we're not going to worry about that too much, and we'll look a little more at it when we get into the overexposed. But for right now, just a basic rundown of what that is. Coming back over here to our actual shot, first thing I would do is I would start by adjusting my highlights. Now, a lot of people, their first thought is to just adjust the exposure, but as you can see here, as I crank that up, it does get brighter, but it really degrades the quality of the shot, so we're not going to do that. Like I said, I'm going to go to highlights. Now, because this is a pretty dark shot, I'm going to go ahead and up my highlights to 100. And that's made our image brighter, but it's not quite enough. We're still pretty underexposed. So the next thing I would do is I would come up here to contrast, and I'm going to lower my contrast down to -100. Now this is already, if we're looking at this is almost usable. If we go ahead and turn off the effects we've added here, you can see the difference between the original and what we've already done. But when you take your contrast all the way down like that, one of the things that tends to happen is your images can look a little gray or a little flat because you've removed all of the different things that make them make them contrasty. It is contrast, right? So what I would do is I would come down here to our saturation, and I would up that to probably about 130, and that adds in just some nice color back in on my skin. I might even come up here to the temperature and take the temperature down by like -5, just because I got a little bit of orange around my eyes. And if we take a look at that compared to the original, it's not what I'd call perfect, but it is certainly much more usable than it was. I wouldn't be bothered by putting this in a video. I will say that you have to be careful when you're doing stuff like this, because the more you mess with your contrast and highlights, things like that, you are going to run the risk of having grainy footage. In this case, because I was in the studio, this background does not look too bad because it actually has light on it. If it didn't have any light on it and I was doing this, what you would see is you would see some more grain appearing back here. All right, and that was underexposed. Now let's go to overexposed. So if I come over here on this clip here, this is actually a clip that I used in a video. It wasn't perfect, but it was what I needed at the time. If we come back over here to our waveform, you can see this white line here. That's going to be this white spot on my forehead. And really, unfortunately, there's not a lot that can be done to truly fix that, but we can make this shot as a whole a little more usable so that maybe it's not quite so embarrassingly overexposed. We are once again going to start in basic correction, and this is going to be just a little more difficult. So first thing I would do in this case is, whereas the last time we took our highlights up, in this case we're going to take our highlights down. Again, you could do exposure, but that's going to address everything and going to wind up looking funky. So highlights, we're going to take our highlights to -100, which is way lower than I would ever really like to, but that's what we're going to do. We're also going to take our shadows down just a hair. Not a lot. And probably our blacks as well. And you can see as I'm doing this, we're sort of spreading out some of the stuff that's happening here. Next thing I would do is I would come into our curves section down here. And if you're looking at your curves, you're right here, what you'll see is this is divided into sections. We've got true highs, true lows, mid lows, and mid highs. And we're just trying to level this out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in right about here, and I'm going to drop down my lows just a hair. And then I'm going to come up here to my mid highs. And we're not going to do a lot. We're just going to kind of level this curve out. Now, again, if we turn this off, you can see the difference between the original and where we're at. Of course, we are still going to have this white spot on my forehead. Like I said, there's not a lot can be done about that, but this is already much more usable. Before I send this out, one more thing that I would do, just like I do with anything else, when I start messing with contrast and things like that, I would probably come back in and add just a little extra saturation. Not as much in this case. We'd probably go up to about 120. And again, I would take my warm tones down just a hair. And so this is what we have now compared to the original truly overblown shot. Now, this shot is honestly almost beyond repair, almost unusable, and even in the shot, even in the version of it that wound up getting used in the video, it's still, my forehead is overexposed by quite a little bit, but the shot is no longer completely unusable. Like pretty much everything, you're going to have to practice at this. Like I said, I'll do a whole video on using your waveform and all of the different scopes you can use in color correction. But for right now, this is just sort of a down and dirty, get into it. Two of the most common things that happen are underexposed and overexposed, and this is sort of the process you would go through to repair that footage. There is no magic that is going to make bad footage truly good, so you're just going to have to endeavor to shoot properly exposed footage, and when you have to fix it, work for the best. That's all I've got. Thanks, and keep shooting, friends.